Good morning and welcome again to OESTA's 7th Annual Native CDFI Capital Access Convening. This is our second day and we are so happy that you have joined us this morning. We have a wonderful day of activities and panels for you. Really hoping that those of you again join the networking session so we can meet new individuals, have an ability to talk, and really be able to have the ability to share impact and possibilities for future funding partnership. So again, giving a plug out for that after this session. So good morning. My name is Crystal Cornelius and I am the president and CEO of OESTA. And I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our plenary panel this morning, our opening plenary, and it is going to be amazing. So we are going to be speaking about financing resilient and regenerative Native communities, building blocks for Native CDFI and investors. And this is really interesting in looking at what true sustainability looks like, looking at climate change. How do we provide models that are truly culturally relevant, applicable, and look for the next generation of planning. So within this next panel, I'm so happy that you are going to be hearing from a band of experts in this field, Stuart Sarkozy-Bonacy, Tina Poole-Johnson, and Kim Pate. So with that, I will turn it over to our opening panel. Again, thank you for coming. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we look forward to seeing you throughout the day, throughout our sessions. So here we go.
Thanks very much, Crystal. It's really great to be here and super excited about our panelists. So the background to this will be my job to kind of put in place, and then we'll go to the deep dive with the both of them. So again, my name is Stuart Sarkozy-Bonacy. I am with Precovery Labs, and I also am part of the Resilient Cities Network and do consulting work on resilience, precovery, and sustainability in various contexts, and have continued to be involved in the Native CDFI movement for some time. I've known Tina and Kim both because of that. Kim, I think it might even be 20 years, certainly Crystal and Linnell, it's more than that. But it's really great to be here today to talk about this because this has very far-reaching consequences. I'm actually talking to you from Lisbon, Portugal, because I am at the United Nations Ocean Conference and working on funding and financing mechanisms for communities. And part of it relates to what we're going to talk to you about today in terms of using resilience assessments and tools. And you're going to get to hear the really deep dive information and practical use that Kim and Tina bring to this and the work that we've been doing together, actually. I am going to set us up with a bit of background, and then we'll get into the specifics of the work. There's probably no question that all of us know that the kinds of things that we're seeing with climate change and the shocks and stresses we're experiencing don't know borders, but there are ways to deal with it that are context-based, and CDFIs can play a really great role in that. And that's part of the origin of this work, is keeping us tracked into how we adjust at the local level. So I'm going to go to the next slide. So the first thing I'd like to do is just talk a little bit about what we mean by resilience, because there are various definitions. You'll often hear me talk about precovery because we're constantly in recovery. And one of the things about resilience building and precovery is that you're trying to do the kind of changes you need ahead of time. And that's where the assessment process and some of the work that's going on. But of course, we know we have to do recovery, we have to do regeneration. And that's where some of the interesting work that NDN Collective and NDN Fund have been doing come into this as part of the process that we've all been going through. So you see on the screen a definition of resilience. It's the one that we use in a couple of different organizations and that I use because it deals with shocks and stresses in combination and all of them, which can feel overwhelming. But we've seen when you have a forest fire and it brings a flood, and then there's COVID, and there's economic hits because hotels and casinos have to shut down. All of it matters. And it's the intersection of those shocks and stresses that we're trying to work on and talk about how CDFIs can play a role in that. And you'll hear the detailed story about that. And it's also not just surviving. You often hear a description of resilience as a survival technique. And what we're trying to say is it shouldn't just be about survival, because there's a long history of that in many communities, including the Native communities that the CDFIs and all of you are working in. And this is something we want investors, funders, and all kinds that work with Native CDFIs to be aware of, right? And to be engaged in, is how we define this. And that we're trying to go beyond survival and adapting and moving towards thriving. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in terms of what we mean by that. Next slide. So just as an example, this is a definition that we were using in what was called the Island Resilience Initiative, which brought in island nations and indigenous communities related to those islands. And we asked them in the focus groups, define what you call resilience. How does that work here? And what's the difference? And in what ways would you want to supplement and make it more your own? And so through what was called the Island Resilience Initiative, they created this definition. So just as an example, and obviously it's quite close to the other one, but you can see where some of the other factors come into play in terms of the localization and the multidisciplinary and owning so much of the conversation around what it means to become resilient. Next slide. I won't spend too much time on this, but just so that people are, when I throw around the word stress or I throw around the word shock, lots of times when people think of natural disasters or resilience itself and sustainability and thinking about safety and risk, including insurance and banking, it tends to be around the shock side. But we know full well that the ongoing chronic stresses are often where things weaken and then they become even worse when the shock hits. So we're trying to be sure that we're not only relying on kind of a disaster risk reduction kind of way of looking at this, but that we're also using stress and shock in combination. And there are many, many more. We have kind of an inventory, but this gives you an idea. And we actually, early on in the project you're going to hear about, we did kind of a shock and stress inventory just with CDFIs of all kinds, including Native CDFIs. And they had some very particular ones of their own based on their local context and as a CDFI. So the list could be quite long when you get down to it. Next slide. So this is probably like, if I take one slide and I use it to talk from, this is the one that I often use because this kind of describes the world that we're in and the world that we want to go to. And you see on the left-hand side, the shocks and stresses, what we call cascading effects or negative effects. That's where we sit today because there are so many of these shocks and stresses happening. And what we want to do is add in these better outcomes and the co-benefits or cascading benefits to create these resilience dividends. And this is where the work of the CDFIs really come into play because you can structure projects in ways, as with the original screens around investing, that make your project stronger, make your community stronger, and therefore create a systemic resilience that's greater. And the fulcrum you see at the bottom is what we call the resilience value. And instead of return on investment only, we're trying to figure out, and we are really still trying to figure out and measure, and you'll hear me talk about that in a second, what it means to say we're going to be resilient going forward. This is the precovery mindset, not working in recovery all the time and not working with just basic, we're going to build back where we were, or we're going to build back how we were. We want to do this in a way that's more effective with the way that CDFIs and their partners and investors and co-funders also work together. And that's kind of the story you'll hear about some of the work that's going on. So there in the fulcrum, we want to make sure that this resilience value is built into the projects in the ways that you see with those qualities, and it stays so that you're not cutting costs later on and then something goes wrong, because lots of disasters are only a disaster because the humans have made choices, us humans, about that. So this is kind of the one graphic I keep up and talk about that kind of gives us, and I want that teeter-totter that to move to the other side as much as possible. Next slide. So this is a detailed definition of the resilience dividends. What's important, and this really relates to the CDFI work, is that if you have a project, you're working on a deal, we already know we want to have better outcomes. It's kind of where sustainability and greening and climate change work come from. But we're saying go one step further with that, is that the better outcomes should have, in terms of materials and standards and codes and quality and siting and all kinds of other things, and have co-benefits that are put into it. And these co-benefits are cascading benefits, I like to call them, mean that if you're going to build a community facility, and there's some projects like this that we've recently worked on, that you're not just looking at the material and the siting, but you're also thinking, could this be an emergency shelter? Could it have solar battery backup? Could it be a youth and elder center, and also a place that's kind of a resilience hub for people to come to get vaccinations? Very common question over the last couple of years. So what can you do with that deal that makes it stronger? And for many of you that are on the lending side, and we've been testing this with loans, and you'll hear about that, what does that mean for the underwriting? What does it mean for when they come to you for the first time and talk about a checklist of things that you'd like to see from them? So the resilience dividends are essentially these two things combined to give us this longer term outlook for whatever that project or deal might be, with this idea that even a small project can be very systemic in the change that it makes. Next slide. And so this is, and I'll go quick through this because not everybody wants the full history, but it's important to the context you're going to hear from first Tina and then Kim, because there was a process behind this that led to us developing the assessment, the tool, and the guidebook and the principles. And it began back in 2016 at an OFN conference, as a matter of fact, where the CEO of the network came to speak about what it would mean to embed, and Annie Donovan at the time was very into this and very supportive. What would it mean to embed resilience in the way that CDFIs work? And of course, this is for banks, it's for all types of CDFIs, but it's also for those that invest in you and impact investors. And then, as you can see, we kind of got closer and closer to doing more. In the midst of that, the hurricane hit, and we were at the conference when it hit. And then it really sped up the kind of conversations. It continued to grow, but the very first version of it was much simpler than it turned out to be, because what we did was get a grant from Bank of America to kind of do an awareness campaign around CDFIs and to look at a checklist and a set of principles, and that was it. But then in the summer of 2019, because of some changes at the organization, we flipped this over to live at OFN, and I stayed on the project with Precovery Labs, and we continued to do the work, but we changed the way we were doing the work. And this is where Tina enters and the team at OFN. And as that evolving process took place, there was an additional grant that allowed us to actually go from awareness and kind of checklists to an actual assessment and start to test that. And that really started to give it some speed and some wheels. Next slide. And so then when we rebooted, we added others to our technical advisory committee. We then started doing workshops and webinars. We dug deep into and had Native CDFIs and others all engaged in, by the summer of 2020, what we were called our CDFI cohort. It was a working group that during COVID, I think we met every Friday for I don't know how many months in a row, and it was amazing. And this set of CDFIs, including NDN Fund, was involved in it, dispersed throughout typology and locations, working on the tool and then testing it. And I won't go into too much detail on it, but basically we got through the testing process and did a whole series of loans, 11 of them in the end that were between 100,000 and 20 million. The $20 million one was an affordable housing project, and got a bunch of feedback on the tool itself, but also extensions for it. Because I forgot to say, one of the ideas in the original campaign is that this would be a campaign not just for CDFIs of all types, but that also impact investors, foundations, architects, engineers, etc., all should be using the same kind of language and looking at these deals in the same way, and looking at this tool that we're working at in the same way. Next slide. And so I'm about to hand it over to Tina, but what I wanted to say from my work even, and being here and the work that I'm doing now, that's both global as well as the work I'm still doing with Native CDFIs, we're taking our very own tool, our assessment, and we're changing it to be something that is laid over the top of what we're now calling a Resilient Community Impact Fund, which is designated for the cities that are part of the net and the communities that are part of the network. So even for some of my work, it's now gone on to a different life. And you're going to hear two different versions of that story from Tina and from Kim that describe the trajectory from here on out. Next slide. But one of the things that's really interesting is that even the principles that you see here are part of the resilient funding and financing assessment that's going into this work. And so now at a global level, this work that came out of CDFIs and that came out of that original story is going to go onto this global grant platform, this fund, in addition to the two stories that you're hearing about and others, because if I don't say it now, we'll say it later. The content has been open source. And so I have passed it on to God knows how many people around the country, and utility boards and different types of CDFIs and banks. And so there might be versions that you run into later on, but just wanted to let you know that in fact, it's got yet another life. I'm not even sure that I've told Tina and Kim that. So I'm now going to, I think that's the last slide, and I'm going to turn it over to Tina, who's going to pick us up from the work that was OFN and is now in her role at CARSI. And Tina, over to you.
Great. Well, thank you so much. It's really a privilege to be here with you all today. And it's been an honor and literally life-changing for me to be part of this project, because it's, well, you'll hear all about why, but it's really pulled together a lot of pieces and instincts and hopes that I had and didn't have a way to articulate. And so Stuart and others, have helped me have that language. And it's really been exciting to be, talking about it. And I've shared it with God knows how many people as well, Stuart. So I was at OFN when I was part of the phase 1 of this project. I am now at the Center for Impact Finance at the CARSI School of Public Policy at the University of New Hampshire. I should have mentioned I use she, her pronouns. And I just want to tell you a little bit about the center and why I've moved over. So this slide sums up the reason that the Center for Impact Finance exists. And I think it sums up why we're all gathered here today. Capital matters, and the absence of capital, the absence of the right type of capital is devastating for communities. Don't have to tell you all that. But it's also important that the capital be the right type of capital and that it be optimized to leverage as much good as possible. And that's what I find so exciting about the tool. The mission of the center is to support initiatives that get capital to where it's needed, but where regular markets find it difficult or impossible to provide that capital. One of my colleagues at the center likes to talk about the fact where we are always the supporting characters. We are never the superhero. We are always looking for protagonists, for heroes to support. We support through various types of initiatives, training, et cetera, but it's always in service to the CDFIs like you all that are on the ground doing the work and that know your own communities. So I wanted to make sure, I hope you all know OFN, but OFN is at this point a national network of 370 plus CDFIs. I know many of you are members. I'm sure you've heard Lisa Mensa and others at OFN talk about how OFN thinks about its work, money, strength, and voice. So OFN provides capital, builds strength, and tries to amplify the voice of the industry and of individual CDFIs. We were really excited when Stuart reached out. It was to Donna Fabiani and said, you know, we're looking for a home for the community development piece of the 100 Resilient Cities work, and we think that OFN would be a good place to sort of be the nexus for the next part of the work. And lots of great things came out of that. Stuart already talked about the development and the testing and the piloting, but there are a couple things that I wanted to emphasize because I think it's really important. We tried to live the principles of the resilient community development finance in this work. To do that, we had Stuart participating as thought leader. I was leading, really staffing the initiative, not leading it, staffing it. But we decided that it was really important to have CDFIs who were working to understand, define, integrate, embed resilience into their work to be driving the initiative. It was important that it not be an academic exercise or something that a trade association tried to layer on. It needed to be something that was real for the folks who were developing it. And we were so fortunate in the CDFIs that became our cohort. NDN Fund, NDN Collective, as you will hear more from Kim, is the rock star of the group. And I say that though love and respect everyone who participated, but NDN Fund is really way far ahead in terms of adopting, integrating, leading this work. So excited for you to hear from him shortly. So 5 CDFI members in self-help tested the beta versions of the assessment tool and the implementation guide. We talked a lot about whether there should be a score and decided that we didn't want there to be a score because it was too hard to really define apples to apples, since we were looking at housing projects, at small business, different types of small business, consumer. But we did want there to be sort of a, bronze, silver, gold, if you will, so that there was a sense that a project itself, or the CDFI could track over time the level of resilience. Out of the deals that were tested, most of them, as you would expect, were partially resilient. One was significantly resilient. We asked the testers to evaluate the experience of the tool. 3 said it was simple to use. I think that's just because they're particularly skilled. I don't think it is a particularly simple tool. 2 found it difficult, and the others said it was, it was reasonable, but not easy to use. In the majority of the tests, the assessments generated actionable ideas on ways to build resilience. And I think that's the key. The cohort decided early on that they didn't want to create a screen because they didn't want to be screening deals in and out. What they wanted was a tool that would help them build resilience in a project, in a building, at a capital moment when there was the opportunity to say, hey, we could raise the foundation, we could add a generator, we could. And I think that, so that's really important. And in the majority of the tests, the evaluator said that it would help them underwrite the project or manage the loan if it was in portfolio. So I want to sort of go backwards. The tool itself and the testing of it is certainly really important. But as Stuart said, we spent weeks and weeks and weeks, and it was really, I came to really miss it after we stopped, because it was such a great way to end the week, was workshopping and brainstorming with this group. But the group decided they wanted to spend considerable time really thinking through the vision, the mission, the objective, and then also developing core values. And I want to go through these one by one, because I think it's easy to feel like, well, either I can integrate the whole tool, into my lending and into my development services, or I can't, and I can't do anything. And I really want to push back against that, because resilience, to my mind, is a performance standard. It's a process, and there's a continuum of things that CDFIs and funders and developers can do. And yet everyone has to start someplace. So I invite you to look at this, these principles, these concepts that the group came up with, and see how they might fit with your work. So the vision, Stuart already talked about the definition. I want to emphasize here that it's stresses and acute shocks, and that the concept of equity is really important here. So we envision a world in which communities are socially, economically, and environmentally safe and healthy, with the capacity to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience, and where all people, especially communities of color, Native nations, and those that are under-resourced, are able to reach their full potential, supported by equal access to capital. So this vision, in my mind, really could be adopted as the overall mission of a CDFI, that the idea of resilience really encapsulates and pushes traditional, first we talked about community development, then we talked about healthy communities. I think that this vision of resilience really kind of takes what we've all been trying to do, some of us for decades, to the next level. The mission of the initiative and the work as it continues is, of course, to build the capacity of low income, low wealth, and other underserved people and communities to survive, adapt, and grow, no matter what kinds of chronic stresses and acute shocks they experience, by ensuring access to affordable, responsible financial products and services that embrace resilience planning and implementation, because that's what we do. We provide access to capital. And the objective of the initiative was to support the adoption of resilience finance by the CDFI industry, but also the plan has always been, as Stuart said, to then also sort of seed these concepts as much as possible with others that impact our community, so investors, foundations, and other stakeholders. I also want to really emphasize, and this is something that was suggested by Nikki Paradas from NDN Fund, that it was really important to say that we were doing all of this while recognizing our role in service to the well-being of the earth and global citizenry. So the core beliefs, again, this list I've really embraced personally. I find it just a great list, and I hope you will too. So one of the starting beliefs, of course, was that investing in resilience will improve quality of life. Second was a belief that responsible resilience requires consideration of lifespan. And this is the whole, money down now versus money over time concept, but it's also thinking about performance of a business, performance of a building, and making sure that it is going to perform over time in extraordinary circumstances that are foreseeable and not just in ordinary day-to-day circumstances. So it's about building the practices that allow a CDFI to not just look at the FEMA maps, which, as we all know, are often wrong now, but to talk to community members and say, where is there flooding? Where is there sunny day flooding? What should we know in order to make sure that this building, this business functions well? Another core belief is that shared resilience requires a focus on equity, anti-racism, climate change, and globalization. Number 4, community resilience is most effectively delivered through integrated, holistic efforts. That's, and I think Native CDFIs and Native nations are really, there's a lot that others can learn from the way Native CDFIs operate, but a building is not standalone. A building is part of a community, and that building should be a good citizen. The business should be a good citizen. 4 more, and then we're done the core beliefs. Importantly is the belief that underpins this, that everyone is entitled to participate equally in social, economic, and political life. Next, our customers deserve excellence. The people and communities that CDFI serve have a right to expect excellence, and we have a responsibility to provide it. Next, input from a wide-ranging and diverse group of stakeholders must shape our work. Even if we think we know the right answer today, things change, economies change, global catastrophe continues, and what is a shock, what the potential threats from shocks and stresses are going to change, and where can we go in order to make sure that we truly understand a community and what that community needs? The community itself, of course. CDFIs are accountable to their communities, but in my view, a lot of CDFIs could do better in engaging with stakeholders. And then, as Stuart said, our work is for the good of all, and therefore all of this work should be freely available. Take the pieces that you like. If there's anything that doesn't work for your organization, obviously don't take that, but feel free to share any of this work widely. It's completely open source. So in sum, I like to think about resilient community development finance as being a process and a performance standard, as well as a goal and a strategy. So it's a way of doing our work, and the principles of resilience ask us to do our work to a higher level. The assessment tool looks at the loans that we're considering, or the loans that we've made, and it asks the businesses to do a better job. It asks the buildings to be better citizens. Again, the tool is not a screen, it's a tool, because we're all starting someplace and we could all do a better job. We don't want to eliminate deals. We want to just support them by helping them be more resilient. The phase 1 project was an iterative process, as I mentioned. It was driven by thought leaders and practitioners. And it's crucial that as this work continues, that it be driven by practitioners again, and continuing, and that we continue to expand the number of CDFIs and others that we're engaged with. So that's an invitation to be involved in this work. However you can be involved in the work. And I will put my, when Kim starts talking, I'll put my email in the chat. I would love to hear from you, both questions or suggestions, and would like to keep in touch as we work on this. The final thing is, there's a lot of discussion, and unfortunately, because of cost pressures, there's often the bad kind of value engineering when a project gets to the point where the financing available is less than what the project, what we'd want the project to be. But this resilience tool and the resilience concept is to my mind, a good kind of value engineering. So what it's saying is, at this moment where we are helping support a business through development services, or where we're looking at and underwriting a project, the whole point of the assessment tool is to say, how can we make this business stronger? How can we ensure that the tenants or the owners of these homes are going to be safe no matter what happens? So I won't go through all of this one by one, but the group, as part of the final deliverables, did a lot of talking about how to articulate the case for centering resilience in CDFI work, mission, lending, etc. Most of this we've gone through already, I've mentioned, but one thing is that this resilience movement has momentum, and Stuart being in Lisbon, and he'll talk more about all the different ways that this work has momentum. But we also have a climate crisis, and that's would be a terrible thing to waste. We really have an opportunity to grow and to do better by our communities and our climate, but also our clients. And everything that anybody does, you know, as we normalize resilience into our work, small ripples can have enormous benefits. So again, I really invite you, if you feel that your organization isn't ready to just incorporate this tool into all of your work, think about the different, the principles, the core values, and the ways in which you can begin asking the questions about how your work can be more resilient and how the projects and the businesses that you serve can be more resilient. And we are, as you all know, we are interdependent. So it's not really a choice to not think about resilience and how we're affecting the greater community. So the phase 1 project was a success. And as Stuart says, lots of people have been asking about it. We've been sharing the materials around. There were, through workshops with our technical advisory committee and with the cohort, and then in conversations, Stuart all over the world with conversations. I got a lot of folks just reaching out and having one-on-one conversations, but there seems a consensus has emerged about what we need to do for our next steps. So phase 2, and there's no announcements yet, but we're in conversations. We at CARSI were at conversations with folks about staffing and leading a phase 2 that would be, again, working with lots of different CDFIs and as inclusive as possible, because that's important for this work. Phase 2 needs to support CDFIs, lenders, and other stakeholders to innovate in their development service and in their lending. And a natural place to start is to support as best we can those that are leading in this area. And you're going to hear from Kim, and NDN Fund is really, as I said, really the rock star here. Again, to try to make the case and to support and encourage CDFIs to center equitable, holistic resilience. Number 3, to support and facilitate collaborative research and impact management for assessing, valuing, and building climate resilience. As Stuart said before, we don't at the moment, well, we all know, and it's completely clear that raising a house so that it's above potential flood levels, having generator hookups, all of those things. I mean, it's just completely clear and obvious that makes a project more resilient, but we don't have shared data indicators. We don't have buy-in across CDFIs or OFN and Inclusive and other trade associations about proxies for valuing resilience that are straightforward to collect, where we'll be able to track over time and show the benefits of valuing resilience. And so that's something we want to prioritize, because we want to be able to make the case and to show that where resilience is not prioritized and these investments are not made, we want to really be able to show in black and white. Next, as I said before, the tool is complex. And while some folks love the complexity of the tool, there was consensus that it would be helpful to have sort of a shorter version that could be used in early stage conversations or also in development services, in order to just raise the issues of resilience without having to go through a detailed assessment tool that takes a couple of hours, where if you're an early stage project, a lot of the answer to the questions would be don't know, not yet, don't know, not yet. There's also a consensus that having toolkits and resources for specific sectors would be very helpful. So having for garden style multifamily properties, having sort of best practices around how to build resilience into those properties, or for high-rise multifamily, or for single family, for businesses of different types. And then it's clear that to continue raising awareness and providing supports and training for those who want to integrate these concepts and the tool. So circling back to CARSI, again, we're not a lender. We're always looking for the heroes to support. You all are the heroes. What we do is we work on initiatives, we develop policies and practices, and we try to mentor and equip practitioners to do the work that they want to do. And with that, I wanted to share some resources. First of all, OFN a couple of years ago did a whole forum around building equitable resilience. That was recorded. It's free and it's available for you on the OFN website. If you're interested in digging into specifics of what does resilience look like in housing, what does resilience look like in small business, what's the relationship of clean energy and resilience, I would invite you to click on that link and treat yourself to a couple hours. The CARSI Center for Impact Finance has 2 professional lending or professional training courses in solar lending. So if you're interested in building resilience through either commercial solar or consumer solar, I would invite you to look at those courses. We are currently working on a course that will be around community solar development. And so that will be to help either advocacy groups, existing developers that are maybe affordable housing developers, those that are not yet active in solar development but want to. This will be a course for community solar development. And then there's 2 white papers that are on the CARSI site as well, and I'll put them in the chat once I stop talking, around equitable solar finance and the ecosystem for clean energy project development in low-income communities. So with that, I have the privilege of giving you my email, and I will put that in the chat as well. But I want to turn it over to Kim Pate, and she's going to talk about how NDN Fund has participated in this phase 1 project, but then really ran with the concepts, and I'll let her tell you all about it. Thank you.
Thanks, Tina and Stuart. Those were both such amazing presentations. This is like peeling back the skin of an onion. You just keep peeling and peeling and getting to richer and richer substance around how to think about resilience, both within your organization as well as in the communities and individuals that we're serving. So great stuff. Kim Pate. I wear a few different hats that come into this conversation. I am the Vice President of NDN Collective, which is a national indigenous-led organization based in South Dakota. My office is here on the Nez Perce Reservation in Idaho. I'm also the Managing Director of NDN Fund, which is the impact investing arm of NDN Collective and an emerging Native CDFI. And I am the Vice Chair of the Board of Nimipu Fund, which is a Native CDFI here on the Nez Perce Reservation led by Janelle Yearout. I am a descendant of Eastern Band Cherokee, Mississippi Choctaw, and Black peoples, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And we'll go ahead and go to the next slide. The important thing to say about this, and I'm not going to hang too much on these background slides because you will be getting copies of our presentations, but the important thing here is to say that from the beginning of the establishment of NDN Collective, which was in 2018, we have brought the values around creativity, innovation, and determination that are in our indigenous peoples and communities to really be the leaders and the architects of their own futures, because it is not for intermediaries to come in and say, this is what you should do. And we heard earlier about the sort of feast and famine cycle of, well, the money runs out and then the project runs out, which is the opposite of resilience. So it's very important for us to, from the beginning of any type of contact that we have in a local community, focus on them and what needs to happen in all of the ways that support and financing is provided for true community-driven projects and outcomes. And we have this prophecy of the eagle and the condor that we like to think about at NDN Collective. So we've arrived at a time for tremendous transformation and unity between the indigenous peoples of the North and the indigenous peoples of the South. A time for the eagle and condor to fly together and create an entire new level of possibility and consciousness for our peoples, planet, and all living things. And for me, this resilience frame allows us to do just that, which I'll share with you now. Next slide. So for those of you who don't know about NDN Collective, we have these 3 legs to our stool, which is that we're increasing philanthropic and capital investment into indigenous-led organizations, communities, people, tribes, and movements. And ultimately, the goal is to create a world that is just and equitable for all people on the planet. We improve the capacity and skills of indigenous-led organizations, and we do this through what we call power building. And the resilience work fits squarely into this. And then thirdly, we advance the rights of indigenous peoples and communities, and this is done through a range of different but important political activities, agenda setting activities, or activism and organizing. Next slide. And this just goes into the details, and we all in this group know very well, so we'll go to the next slide. And the next slide. And the next slide. So we have this defend, develop, decolonize theory of change. And we believe that there's an intersection that happens across the defense, the development, and the decolonization of the grantees, of the borrowers, of their communities, of the entire sector of indigenous-led activities, whether it's through tribal organizations or enterprises, individual indigenous-led efforts, or massive community-based indigenous efforts. But all of it is around taking an ecosystem approach to building indigenous power and self-determination. And this is important for how we applied the RIA tool, which is what we've called it at NDN Fund. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, let's just keep on going. One more. So we have a grant-making arm of the collective. We also have, as you heard, NDN Fund, which is the lending and investing arm, and we work together because we know that a lot of times there's a way in which equity through a grant paired with a loan can make the funds travel much faster and farther and have much more long-term sustainable impact. So it's true that the resilience work that we do through NDN Fund is also permeating all of the work that we do at NDN Collective. It's not just part of our CDFI. Let's go to the next slide. And that just talks about our direct action arms. So you can see we've got many arms, and we approach all types of issues that we're trying to solve for in Indian country with this holistic approach. So there's literally no wrong door, whether it's to get a grant, to get a loan, to do some nonviolent direct action, to do get out the vote efforts. It's all interconnected and it's all coordinated. Next slide. And we do for-profit work as well. Next slide. So we talked a little bit earlier about NDN Fund being a part of the resilience early phases and making sure that our Native voices were at the table. And I really have to give Nikki Paradas, who was the previous managing director of NDN Fund, as well as Tawny Wilson, who's our current loan officer at NDN Fund, a lot of credit for working closely with Tina and Stuart to build out in a really deep and thoughtful way how our theory of change and our focus on resilience and regenerative principles could weigh into it. And these slides just go into detail about how we showed up for those conversations. So we'll just go to the next slide. And I just wanted to point out that here is a link to our indigenous resilience and regenerative economic principles, which are very aligned with this approach we're talking about today, which is almost serendipitous, I will say. So let's go to the next slide. Those are the core areas that we lend in. So renewable energy, community development and housing, infrastructure, social enterprise, and regenerative agriculture. This is not to say this is the only type of lending we do, but this aligns with what? The resilience and regenerative principles that we have. So we try to stay the course and make sure that we're not having mission creep, right? And like starting to do things that don't fall within our theory of change and what we expect to have as impacts in our communities. Next slide. And these are the two lending programs that we have, Relief and Resilience, which is up to $500,000, and Seeding, which is up to $500,000, and then Seeding, which is over $500,000. Both of these lending programs are available to, a whole list of different types of indigenous actors and initiatives. Next slide. Some of our values: relationships are sacred, and we're really flipping how we think about who's eligible for a loan and what does capacity look like and what could potential income outcomes be from the lending. Really, the focus should always be on the community, as I led with. Our loan fund only succeeds when the projects succeed, and there is no compromising on that. And so this begs the question, how do we know when our projects are succeeding? And this is where the resilience impact assessment tool comes into play. Next slide. So you heard a lot about it already. I don't need to go into detail on this particular slide, except to say that the tool, which we've named Resilience Impact Assessment, or RIA tool, was the logical evolution from our resilience and regeneration principles, and has really taken us in directions that I don't think any of us expected we could go. So it's a huge honor to have been a part of this work and to continue on with both Tina and Stuart into the future, because we've road tested this thing, which I'll get into in a minute. So we know all four corners of it now and where we want to take it next. And this is really an evolving tool. I think Tina said this really well. It's, you know, you do yourself a disservice if you say, oh, we're not there yet. We can't participate in this because we're not ready, or whatever it is. We'll never be ready. You know, this is not something you get ready for. This is something you just dive into, and you dive in at whatever place you're at. And the beauty of this open source process that Stuart, I thought, talked really eloquently about is that we can all co-create this at any given moment, because it is a living inquiry, if you will, that is participatory in the sense that we want to know, is this working for our borrowers and capacity building clients? And I'll show you in the next couple of slides how we figure that out. So let's go to the next slide. So Tina talked about how the feedback that they got for phase 2 was, hey, maybe make this a little bit stripped down, easier to use, to talk with a potential new borrower or capacity building client. Well, we have done that in a few different ways. So the first way was we actually used this RIA tool to inform our eligibility screen, which we're about to launch on our updated website. Because yes, we edited and updated our website, the section that is about NDN Fund on the ndncollective.org website, to track the RIA tool in every possible way. So on there is a button that says eligibility. You click eligibility if you're trying to figure out if you can get either the lending services from us or the development services, which we call power building. You click on an eligibility button, and it takes you to a screen that is the first stripped down version of the RIA tool. Next, if they are eligible, and there's only like 5 questions, because we believe that it should not be this like onerous, you know, pre-application that feels like an application. It should just be like yes, no. And this is also similar to the way we do eligibility screening across the ecosystem at NDN Collective. Then they are invited to submit their loan application in LenderFit. And again, LenderFit has been geared to the RIA tool. Then decisions about whether to proceed with a loan application, which are at this point made by the NDN Fund team, led by Tawny Wilson. We look at the 6 R's of resilience finance, which is our way of flipping the 5 C's of credit and indigenizing the way we look at fitness for a loan. This is also the time when we decide, hey, maybe not a loan right now. Maybe we hold and we provide capacity building services, development services, TA, there's lots of names for it, to get the potential borrower to a place where they are eligible for the loan. And again, the RIA tool allows us to do this because combined with the 6 R's, and Tawny created these 6 R's, which I'm totally excited about, reputation, resources, reach, reciprocity, relationship, and a good score on our RIA tool. And I know we don't score it, but we have created our own scoring method because we need that. It's just helpful for us for the due diligence we have to do in the indigenous context, which is a little bit different, right? There's a lot of due diligence that needs to happen to make sure that all of the environment surrounding the loan is viable. But we can talk more about that later. So we also use all of this to then present to our loan committee about why we think we should move forward with a loan. And I got to tell you, the slides that Tawny puts together in Prezi around the RIA tool are like, our loan committee goes nuts. They absolutely love it because it's so visceral. You can really see what's happening on the ground before you make the loan, which is everything. And it's just very engaging, and there's a lot of good detail. So this is another reason why we love this tool and why we use it a lot. And it also has this, gives us the ability to set a baseline. This is where the borrower was, or the capacity building client was at the beginning of the partnership. And then the quarterly borrowers reports and quarterly capacity builder reports allow us to see, as we're going along, how are we tracking on all of the dimensions of the RIA that we wanted to be able to put into our loan, and then measure, and then course correct as needed, because we know that there are bumps. We had a pandemic, you know, who expected that? You know, there are all kinds of things that we need to do to be able to survive those chronic stressors and those acute shocks. Yeah, so we'll go on to the next slide. So we can get into detail. We're running short on time. I'm happy to share the RIA tool that we have with anybody who's interested in the spirit of open source, and even walk through it with you and explain how we use it and how great it is, which I love. So let's go on to the next slide. I want to get to Q&A. Yeah, these are just the facets of the tool, which again, we can talk about in detail later. And the principles, again, you know, a lot of it is just, you know, you guys know this. You're already asking these questions. And so what's also really amazing about this tool is it's what we're already doing. It's just organizing it. Next slide. And yeah, Native Conservancy, they are creating an ocean kelp farmers alliance up in Cordova, Alaska. We've taken them through the RIA tool, and once we make the loan, we'll continue to assess the progress, make sure that we are helping them have the intended impact. As Tina and Stuart have both said, this is a climate crisis we're in. We don't have time to wait. These guys don't have time to wait. And I want to make sure that our loan does everything it possibly can to create the blue-green economy up there, to save our planet in whatever way that it can, and to be able to be a model for the rest of Indian country. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Kim. No one could see how bad I was geeking out, so I'm thankful that my camera was off. But having been through the process for a long while with NDN Fund, previous to even some of this work, and then how the worlds kind of came together in a very nerdy Native CDFI way, I kind of got the chills, even though I know everything about the process. Just seeing you describe it makes me feel good. And I'm one of those loan committee members who, when I see the assessment pop up, I kind of get the giggles. Kind of embarrassing, really. Really appreciate it from both of your angles. And as all of you can hear, the work started simply in terms of awareness and in terms of sort of bringing resilience into the CDFI world and other parts of the support function for CDFIs and Native CDFIs. And now it's really grown, and you can see it on the ground. And one of the questions was whether or not we can share the checklist. We're going to share the whole tool. We can share the whole tool with you. Kim has just said she can share the RIA with you. And as both Tina and Kim have said, and I sort of intimated at the beginning, one of the wishes that I used to say to Tina was, if people just take the principles and start to apply them, even that is a beginning. That is a win. That is a change in the way that we're looking at deals. If you just looked at the 3 principles and started to think about, did we do any of that? Did our client do any of that, right? Did we think about this from these various standpoints? And so when you see the tool, you'll see that each of the principles has a set of dashboards under it and a set of open-ended questions. And that's where what was the resilience checklist became this dashboard. And in fact, I didn't want it to be a screen so bad that my red, yellow, green colors have become shades of green, because they didn't want anything that even looked like something that was a screen or a pass fail. So that was the first question that came out, was about sharing the checklist. I'll share the tools as we've said. I have a couple of questions I want to throw at Tina and Kim right now, because I think these are the questions that we're hearing as it gets advanced into other parts of the CDFI sector. And I should have said, I sit on the loan committee for NDN Fund, and I'm on the board of directors for Bands Community Fund. For most of you probably know, I was the founder there. And of course, I worked at Awista. So for me, this is 2 worlds very much colliding. And it's amazing to watch the process and really to see it become something that's owned and bought in and indigenized. So the first question for Tina and Kim both is, assuming that the tool continues to be improved and used, how do you see the role of native CDFIs and CDFIs in general in keeping resilience baked into deals, keeping the real co-benefits and cascading benefits in the projects? Because often these things go to bid, they go to contract. If it's related to the tribe, it's going to be a contractor procurement process. Assuming the tool gets improved, how do you see the role of native CDFIs in making sure that we're keeping this top of mind?
Do you want me to jump
easy
in
question.
first? Yeah, I
Sure.
don't want to follow Kim. I'm going to go first, and then Kim can play sweep. Just to repeat some things I said before, so and Store put in the chat, you seem emotional, and I am emotional too, because as I said, this has really been life-changing for me, because it has given me words to articulate things that I believed, and that it's a way of articulating goals that I didn't have the words before. And I think that's an important part of all of this. As I said, sort of there's community development. Well, what does that mean? Healthy communities was sort of another way that CDFIs and the industry, economic development, well, what does that really mean? I like the way Kim talked about how, are deals succeeding the way we want them to succeed? And that's where the tool comes in. It asks, and as Stuart just said, I mean, the tool is really asking, applying the principles, turning them into questions, and asking them, lots of different ways in order to really try to get at all the pieces of this. Again, this is, to my mind, it's a definition and it's a performance standard, and it's pushing all of us to really make good on the promises that we've made in our mission statements, in our, in our work, as we show up every day. And native CDFIs in native communities and other CDFIs elsewhere, that's the work that we've, signed up to do. And I think this is a performance standard. It's a goal, it's a process, and it's a way of asking the questions and pushing ourselves. And the word resilience is my final thing. The word resilience is getting thrown around a lot at the moment. And I find myself pulling up this definition and putting it in the chat, in lots of different situations, because I think it's really, I've totally, you've converted me, Stuart. People often talk about resilience just in terms of climate resilience, which of course is huge. We are in a crisis, but it's not just climate resilience, it's economic and social resilience as well. And the pandemic has taught us that, there's been a racial reckoning, but racism has been around for millennia and is in a lot of ways worse than ever. I mean, all of these chronic stresses. So I'll stop talking, but I think it's And again, just to another shout out, any place you start with this, anytime you ask a question about how could we do this a little bit better, how can we make sure that we are truly reflecting our community, listening to stakeholders, understanding what's happening on the ground, then you're doing this resilience work.
Yeah, great question, Stuart. I feel like it's about accountability. Ultimately, we're using this tool at the beginning, not just with a borrower or a capacity building client, but also with our investors who are funding NDN Fund. And we're very transparent about the fact that we have this tool and that we're using it, and that our quarterly reports to them are geared also towards the RIA, to which I didn't mention, and that we have a whole evaluation that we're doing with Bowman Consulting, which is an indigenous-led consulting firm around evaluation that gets Native CDFIs. They're working with us to turn the RIA tool into an annual report template, to refine the quarterly borrowers report that we're currently using, to make that initial script that we use when we do intake on our loans. Like, I really, like, this has been so mainstreamed in my brain that I can't not think about it. And the other really beautiful way to make sure that Native CDFIs stay involved in this is that we're sharing. After today, right, the tool that was developed by you two and others, and then the way we've adapted it for NDN Fund, and we're willing to talk through how to use it and learn from people who adapt it in other ways, right? There's this wonderful feedback loop, virtuous circle is how I think about it. So yes, accountability is key, and it's going to save us.
Yeah, I think you both kind of leaned into the second question I was going to ask, because it's about making sure that the adopting of it and the adaptation of it continues. And that's already happening. I did allude to the fact that Tina and I both have been sharing this with all kinds of different entities. And I think what we experience, and I think Kim will agree with some of the loan reviews, is that even the borrower at the tribal level is starting to look at this, or they will at least have been asked questions that the loan committee pushes back to them that relate to the overall response and resilience on it. And of course, that helps upstream for the borrower and the developer and others. And I hope that continues. We are, I think, if I'm correct, 2 minutes away from closing time, which is a very sad state of affairs because I feel like we just got started. So I want to check in with Heather and anyone else and make sure that there are no more questions that we haven't seen in the other chat. I know they shared out contacts. I know they shared that we're going to be letting you have the tools themselves. But if there aren't any last minute questions, I want to turn to both of the two of you, not just to thank you, but to say, 30 seconds, what's your big dream for this, say 10 years from now, if you had to say where we were as a group and this tool and the work that we're doing, maybe more than 30 seconds, but a minute each, where are we going to be in 10 years if we move this?
I'll just start because I've been thinking about this since yesterday. We have this opportunity to align with other ways that impact is being measured, like the Sustainable Development Goals, the UN indigenous work. There's so many different metrics out there, and I don't feel like they're aligning. So in my perfect world, all of this aligns for the benefit of indigenous peoples, and it's not just here in the United States, it's global. And so we're able to be very clear about the impacts we're having and understand what that means. And it's not how many hectares are under indigenous control, although that may be part of it, but I want to get from like the bean counting to like the big picture of impact to know if we're having it or not.
Right. Tina?
You know, I can't do anything in 30 seconds, Stuart, but I'm going to try. You know, I mean,
to a minute.
my dream is that we don't need CDFIs anymore, and we don't need the resilience tool. I don't think that's a 10-year goal, unfortunately, but you know, there shouldn't need to be a resilience tool that's layered on top of other underwriting. It should just be part of the underwriting. The way we do business should be, you know, reflecting our communities, listening to our communities, not just, you know, checking whether something meets a building, you know, a building code or zoning. And of course, there should be access to capital for all people and, you know, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I hope that we put ourselves out of business, you know, through this work eventually. And in the meantime, I'm really looking forward to working with all of you, you know, on this journey as we all try to get better.
Great, thanks. And thanks to both of you. That was a great journey through the process. And even though I've been on it, it's been incredible to hear you both talk about it and where it sits right now. So thanks to you both. And I think I now turn it back over to Linnell.
Thank you, Stuart. And I just want to extend another thanks to our panelists and then the moderating by Stuart. We really appreciate it. And that was so informative and absolutely amazing. So we are at time, and we want to encourage you all to join our networking sessions. We do have 2 separate sessions from 12:15 to 1 p.m. So click out of this link and then jump into the next link, but also rejoin us for the breakouts. We have 3 breakouts from 1:30 to 3 p.m. Go back to your platform and find the links there. And then of course, our closing plenary from 3:15 to 4:15. And I also just wanted to mention, they did say that their contacts were available. So just go on over to the right-hand side of your platform. There should be a chat function. It doesn't automatically pop up, so you have to click on it to get access to everything. So make sure you jump in there as well. So thank you all, and we'll see you throughout the day.